How you doing, folks? So I'm going to cover some of the things I learned through my journey to get my CFI. For me, it took about 2 years to get the CFI, and it was on and off journey, and a lot learned through the process. So I'll just jump right into it. I started it like all my other exams. I went over and I took my written exams. I'd been out of flying for about 2 years, and I did not realize how much I had forgotten. But ultimately, I passed both exams. The CFI exam I didn't do as well on, partially because basic test taking tips. You know, just make sure if you have to go to the bathroom, those physical needs, those physiological needs are very important. And in my case, I had to go to the bathroom. I rushed through my exam, and I passed, but just barely. Then I went over and I signed up to CFI Academy out in California. And the thing I will say about any academy is they warn you normally over the phone, and in my case they did. Be prepared. Read these two books, the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. Read it, know it, take notes. Learning is an active process, right? If we're just reading, we're not actually retaining as much knowledge. If you write it down, or you take your own notes, not just highlight, but write it down as notes, it helps out a lot. Quiz yourself on it. Make sure you know your fundamentals of instruction. Make sure you know Chapter 7, Flight Instructor Responsibility. See, I still remember it. It was over 2 months ago when I took my exam. Also, the Airplane Flying Handbook. Both FAA publications, both available in PDF online. Definitely get them in PDF format as well, but I like the hard copy as well because you can tab them out. You can see my, that one's not tabbed out as much anymore anyway, but you see this one's pretty beat up. That's how much time I spent with it. But believe it or not, even though I spent so much time with it, I hadn't retained as much knowledge in it as I thought. So, which brings me down to the CFI Academy. I went out to CFI's Academy, and this is what you want before you go to any of these academies. Read those books and create your lesson plans. There's nothing that I'm not going to tell you here that they're not going to teach, that they're going to teach you, that you need to know to start building your CFI book. My CFI book, I'm going to get it over here. My CFI book is over 600 pages long. Did I write all 600 pages? No. That would be crazy. I would be still writing it, and I wouldn't be a CFI like I am today. So when you do your CFI book, the idea is to cover every single lesson that is in the PTS. Make sure you have every single possible lesson covered. I went over with an off-the-shelf download my first run at it, and I had a mock check ride with another examiner in the area. He looked at it and he says, "Hey, this is Pilot Nick." It says Pilot Nick. You're Pilot Mike. I don't know who this guy is. I don't want to see this. I'd fail you for that. Now, that being said, not all examiners really care as much about that, but he had a very good point. Create or recreate your own lesson plans using your own style. You want to be clear, concise, and to the point when you teach. You don't want to be fumbling through reading somebody else's lesson plan that you may or may not agree with, or it might have included something in there that you don't even understand. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. As far as creating lesson plans, it's a simple format. You're going to go ahead, especially for what we're doing here. You're going to go over and pull up the Flight Instructor PTS as it is at this time of the video. When it becomes ACS, same thing. So you go over and pull up the PTS. In the PTS, you have your elements. Copy and paste those elements. Take them right from the PTS and drop them right into your lesson plan. So mine, it starts off with references, talks about where I got my information, my objective of the lesson. You can pull the objective from the Airplane Flying Handbook. You can pull it from the Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, or you can just kind of wing it together with either stuff that you got off the shelf, as long as it makes sense and follows through. Your elements must come from, or should come from, the PTS. The reason why I say that is I would even do them verbatim. So basically, and I did. So basically, as I was going through and teaching my lesson, I would say the purpose of chandelle, blah, blah, blah. I would just make sure that as I was teaching it, I would go through and do a mental checklist, and I would look right at my lesson plan and say, I talk about the purpose of chandelles and their relationship to basic and advanced airmanship skills. I talk about the selection of entry altitudes. I talk about entry airspeeds and power settings. I talk about division of attention and planning. I talk about coordination of flight controls and the importance of that, and so on and so forth. Pitch and bank and attitudes at various points during the maneuver. Again, we talk about that. The examiner's sitting there looking at his or her PTS, and they're checking it off. And they're like, okay, he's following in line with what I need to hear. He's staying on point. He's not adding extra things. He's just talking about what we need to hear. And it keeps your lessons short and concise. When you're teaching your exams, when you're teaching to your examiner, I personally told my examiner that I would abbreviate or move quicker than I normally would with a student in the interest of time. The second time around, when I actually passed my exam, he smiled at that. They like that, or at least mine did, because they know that we have to cover each technical subject area. When we go through that PTS, there's a lot of stuff to cover. They don't have time to sit there for an hour and listen about chandelles when they still have to cover, ground reference maneuvers. They still need to talk about runway incursions and all the other stuff. So, lesson schedule, you just kind of throw together. Equipment, you just kind of put together, makes sense, common sense stuff. Instructor actions, again, common sense. Instruct the student, ask questions, have the student explain the maneuver, so on and so forth. Student actions, listen, ask questions, and take notes. Seems simple, right? Completion standards. I went ahead and pulled up the ACS for whatever it was. Let's say it was a commercial maneuver. I pull up the ACS and I do a screenshot of the actual ACS and I include it in my lesson plan. So that when I hand this lesson plan over to the examiner, they're like, he knows what the completion standards are because I'm looking at them right from the ACS. Common errors, again, common errors come right from the PTS booklet. You can download it on PDF, copy and paste it, and go from there. Instructor notes. Now that's where you can either create your own instructor notes or you can use someone else's, but whatever you do, make sure whatever is in there is correct and you agree with it and you understand it. Don't have something in your book that you don't agree with or you don't understand, because there are off-the-shelf products that have mistakes written into them. They make changes all the time. People do make mistakes. Go through and make sure that your instructor notes are going to help you teach it. The pictures. For me, drawing was not my skill. Multimedia is my thing. I went ahead and created PDFs for a couple of the maneuvers. I did a PDF, I'm sorry. I did a PowerPoint. I did a PowerPoint for a couple of the maneuvers. I did a PowerPoint for chandelles, PowerPoint for lazy eights. I believe something else, I forget. But point is, or eights on pylons, I did a PowerPoint for as well. And I taught the examiner from the PowerPoint. And then that way, number one, it was much easier to teach. And number two, they're impressed. Because now all of a sudden I have a lot of information. I'm actually going to pull up something that you're going to be asked, and that is on runway incursions. And one of the things I got the best compliment from the runway incursions lesson plan. And basically what I had done, it's been a few months since I've gone through this book, but basically what I had done was I went through and I pulled up YouTube videos of runway incursions, real life. So we've all probably seen the YouTube video where the Cessna's coming into land, and just as he enters the flare, just before touchdown, another Cessna pulls in front of him. At that point, I did a screenshot, and I included it in my attention portion of my lesson, where I was trying to get the attention of the student. Why are runway incursions so dangerous? Why do we need to learn about how to operate around an airport so we don't become one of these statistics? I also included statistics from the FAA. How many runway incursions have we had due to pilot deviations and whatever? So, that way I draw attention to the student of why are we learning this? It's the most important thing, especially with your adult learners. They want to know why they're learning what they're learning. That way they start to retain it. So I said, don't be this guy. And I did a little bubble above it. And the examiner was blown away. He said, I do this all the time and I've never seen anyone do that before. Then I went over and I took another screenshot of the Cessna that was landing, and the car pulls in front of him and he takes off the landing gear just as he hits the car. That was another one. So I said, it's not only just airplanes that you have to worry about. It's people, vehicles, all these different things that go into runway incursions. You will be asked about runway incursions, by the way. And that goes back to the preparation. Read the PTS, cover to cover. When the ACS comes out, do the same thing. Read the ACS, cover to cover, for your CFI exam. You don't have to read every ACS, just read the flight instructor one. So that way you understand, if you read the beginning portions of the book, there's a lot of value there. The beginning portions of the book outline how the exam is going to be given. And the exam is going to start. Fundamentals of instruction. Know your fundamentals of instruction cold. Don't be fumbling around like I did on my first exam. My first time around, the examiner, I wasn't ready. 7.5 hours of oral, and I still failed. Why did I fail? I failed on airworthiness of all things. Now I'm a bit of a, an expert in airworthiness. I totally understand airworthiness. Know your subjects. Make sure you have somebody quizzing you. If I were to ask you, what's Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, you should be able to rattle them off. If you can't rattle them off, you're not ready. If I asked you, what are, in fundamentals of instruction, what are the laws of learning? If you can't rattle off the laws of learning quickly, or at least write down the acronym and then quickly parrot it back, and then explain a little bit about each one as you go through. If you can't do that, you're not ready. And I wasn't ready the first time around. The second time around, I was ready. When we went through, and even when I was so ready, and I had been quizzed so many times, I still stumbled a little bit, and I had to write it down. And when I wrote it down, I was able to parrot back. When you sit down with the examiner, you're going to go through all the normal things that you do with any other exam. You're going to go through ID, you're going to go through your logbook endorsements, make sure your logbook endorsements are set. Make sure all your paperwork's in line, just like you do for any of your exams. Make sure your check is ready. Make sure you get there a half an hour to an hour before the examiner gets there. That way you're calm and ready to go. You got to cover all that basic stuff. Then they're going to dive right into fundamentals of instruction. The faster you go there, the better off you are. Some ask you to teach fundamentals of instruction. I was prepared to do that as well. I got a lesson plan on it and everything. Then they're going to ask you about flight instructor responsibilities, professionalism, and then we're going to start talking about runway incursions. Airworthiness gets thrown in there somewhere, so most of the time. Then they're going to teach. Then they're going to ask you to teach a couple maneuvers, performance maneuver. They're going to ask you to teach a ground maneuver. Some examiners, like my first examiner, wanted me to teach aerodynamics. He wanted me to teach why weight and balance is important. So I'm sitting there, I'm going into center of pressure, center of gravity in relation to center of pressure, and all this other stuff before I got his attention. And I looked at him and he started to doze off. He wasn't literally dozing off, but I was boring him. And he asked me, he goes, can you tell me why weight and balance is important in 3 words? And I was totally lost. And after he told me, it made total sense, and it drove the point home. And this is the one point I will leave you. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS. So, why is weight and balance important as an example? Well, weight and balance affects stability of the aircraft, controllability of the aircraft, and performance. That's it. Too heavy, we're not going to get the performance. Out of weight and balance limits, we're going to affect our stability. Out of weight and balance limits, we're going to affect our controllability of the aircraft. That's it. Don't have to get any harder than that. When you're getting your students' attention, start simple, use the building blocks, and build up to complex. Again, when you're teaching your examiner, move quickly. Talk quickly, but explain that you're talking quickly because it's an exam. Don't let them think that you're going to ramble on through like you would with the examiner, with the student. Make sure you ask them to, or invite them to ask questions at the end when you're done teaching as well. Make sure that they're totally happy with everything. Read their body language. If you get an answer wrong, you say something wrong, you're going to pick it up right away. If you're boring them, you're going to pick it up right away. So that's basically it. So just to review, fundamentals of instruction, know your flight instructor responsibilities, professionalism. Have your CFI book ready to go. Your lesson plans, you want to write your own lesson plans. Don't have somebody else's lesson plans in your book. Instructor notes, you can pull from somebody else. It's fine to use instructor notes from somebody else. Have pictures. wasn't good at drawing myself, so I used a lot of pictures when I was teaching flight controls as an example. In my flight controls lesson, I literally just sat there with a book side by side with the examiner. Don't sit across from him either. If you sit side by side, it's better. Side by side with the examiner, and I would show him what a Fowler flap looks like, show him what a slotted flap looks like, show him what a plain flap looks like. That way I can teach and show at the same time without having to try to struggle my way through drawing. If you're good at drawing, God bless you, you know, that's awesome, but that's not my talent. That's not one of my skills, at least at this point. So that's it. As far as the flight is going to be based on commercial pilot standards. As you're flying, you want to make sure that you're constantly teaching. Don't sit there and overanalyze it and think you have to be perfect or that you're demonstrating your abilities. You're not so much demonstrating abilities to fly, because that's already been tested by the FAA, and they're happy with that. They know you're a commercial pilot. They want to see your ability to teach. So as an example, you're doing a steep turn. You do a steep turn to the left. You're sitting on the right side of the aircraft. The nose appears to drop as you go into that left steep turn. You let the nose, instead of letting the nose drop with your perspective with parallax, you accidentally pull back too much on the yoke. When you pull back too much on the yoke, what happens? Of course, you climb. So, you made a mistake. Now you teach it. So you say, see how I just did that? I pulled up too much because on my side of the airplane, it looked like I was descending. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to release a little bit of back pressure, maybe reduce a little bit of power so my airspeed stays in check. And now I'm back to my altitude. Now I'm going to bring the power in a little bit, double check my airspeed, double check my altitude, my VSI, everything's level. And we memorize that sight picture as we go around the turn. Stop the turn, come back the other way. Same thing, you made a mistake. Maybe this time you climbed too much or you descended too much. Now you descended. How do we get back up to altitude? Well, there's two things we do. We reduce the bang and we pull up a little bit, but we also add a little bit of power, so we hold that airspeed. By the time I got down to my CFI exam, my airspeed was nailed. I never did steep turns that nice. But now that I had taught it so many times, and I taught my way through my own mistakes, I was that much better at it. And they were beautiful. Did I do everything right on the flight test? Of course not. Was everything within standards? Yes. Whenever I would make a mistake, I would teach my way out of it. And that's what you need to do. Just constantly remember, you are a flight instructor. Wake up on the day of your check ride. Look yourself in the mirror and say, I am a flight instructor. Don't think of yourself as trying to become a flight instructor. That day, you are a flight instructor. You will log it as instruction given. And that's the best feeling in the world. When you sign your own logbook and you say instruction given, that's pretty cool. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys. It's a little bit of a long video, but it does cover a lot. Make sure you're prepared if you go into any of the CFI academies, no matter American Flyers, ATP, whoever. Make sure you're prepared. Know the knowledge ahead of time. And think of the academy as a chance to practice and hone your skills, because that's what you're going to do there. You don't want to be reviewing knowledge that you already should have had. You don't want to be sitting there cramming to try to build a CFI binder before you get there. Build your CFI binder ahead of time. That way you can practice your teaching. And you go from there. Aside from that, you get released and now you're a flight instructor and the real fun begins. And so far, every single time I've gone up flying, I keep reminding myself that I'm impacting somebody's life, especially on the intro flights. A lot of these people have never even been in a small airplane. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun bringing people, just like you do when you take people flying, but now you're a flight instructor. Now you're a professional, and it's a whole nother level. And it's a lot of fun. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys, and like the video. Please leave your comments. Let me know anything you think, any other suggestions for future CFIs, anybody else going out there and try to do this. And best of luck and happy flying. See you.